I've learned a couple of things since I arrived at Rockwood this morning, and they are important for this talk. And the first is that you're very busy today, so I am part of a busy day, and I appreciate that your minds will be running around with that. And secondly, is that these meetings, these slots in your program, are slots that will otherwise be free time. So I feel a burden of responsibility to honour your free time. I mean that, actually. And so if there's anyone here, and be careful how you answer this question, if there's anyone here who would really not like to be here, I would invite them, and you will not offend me, to put up your hand. And you're going to do a job for me. So it's not a bad job. Okay, at the back. What's your name?
Louis.
Louis. Okay. So I salute Louis for his bravery. And I appreciate it. And the job that he will have, given that I am taking Louis' free time, as well as the rest of your free time, is that if Louis gets bored, I invite him to raise his hand. And if I don't notice Louis, you can wave your hand, okay? And that gives you the right to sort of make a comment about why you're bored, if something's confusing you or whether just boring you. And I'll stop and we can talk about that and we can see if I can do any better. Yeah? So that's my contract with you, is to sort of, is to honour your free time with something that I hope will actually entertain you and inform you and be a sort of transfer of stuff that I've learned over the last 30 years or so, which if I could go in a time machine back 30 years, I think might be helpful. So 30 years ago I was 21, obviously a little bit still older than most of you, and I think it would have been really cool if I'd known some of this stuff then, because I probably would have taken slightly different directions, made slightly different choices. So Louis is my man, he'll keep me right, I hope. And if there's anything slipping off, and anyone else who didn't feel brave enough to say, actually I'd prefer to be somewhere else, you know, you may get a special joker card if you get really, really bored as well, so it's not just Louis. But I also hope that Louis will be fine. So, who is this guy? This isn't quite the PowerPoint perfect conditions, but this is who I am. That's a Scottish surname, Chalmers, and in fact, I share it. The Scottish names are a bit funny. They come from clans, and so we have. I'm just putting the clock up here so I know where I am. We have clans in Scotland. You know, MacDonald's, McGregor's, things like that. Well, Chalmers come from a clan as well, and until recently you wouldn't really have heard of it, but it's the Cameron clan. So obviously that's relevant for British people and British politics. David Cameron and I must be related. I don't know when, but it was sometime in the distant past of Scotland. But I'm 51, I'm British, I was born in Scotland, I'm a journalist, a campaigner related to journalism, and I'm also a teacher. I teach students in Toulouse, in different places. So on the one hand is the sort of physical bit, and then on the other side is the much more physical bit. I like Scotland, but not as much as I like the planet. So I sort of, you know, if there's sort of sports events and things like that, I'm sort of Scottish. But if you really push me, I can abandon it. Because my allegiance is to the right-hand planet rather than to Scotland on the left-hand side. And I say that not just to sort of be ha-ha-ha about my origins, I also say that because it's relevant to my journalism. My journalism is to do with the planet. It's not to do with Scotland or the United Kingdom or the European Union or any notions of territory from that point of view. If there's any territory, it's the planet and the citizens to whom I'm accountable when I'm thinking about what to do in journalism is 7.5 billion humans, but also other species as well, plants and animals. So that's my sort of journalism constituency, as it were. What does it mean in sort of, you know, conventional terms? So that's where I live on Twitter, Patrick Chalmers. That's where I live on Facebook, Fraudcast News. And this book, Fraudcast News, How Bad Journalism supports our bogus democracies. You can get that for free. Despite the reputation the Scottish people have, you don't have to pay for it, so you can download it from that website. And in a way, that is a sort of, it's an account of the sort of scars, the bruises, the mistakes, the embarrassing things of a lifetime of journalism. It's sort of a confession, what I did wrong becoming a journalist in conventional terms, and then leaving it, and then the reflections on that. And the reflections, you can see it in the title and the subtitle, is that conventional news, the way we see it, and really any conventional news you could think about, is not doing a very good job. We are in 2018, we have climate change, which is pretty spectacularly bad. We have rising levels of inequality. We have loss of species. We're in the Holocene age. I'm sure you know what that means at Rockwood. It's the extinction of species. There's some pretty tough stuff going on, and neither our political systems nor our journalism, as conventionally expressed, are sort of dealing with that. So that's where I stand, is that my profession are not doing a very good job, and the job should be holding our politicians to account, and the politicians are not doing a very good job. Louis, how am I doing as far as the job is going so far?
Doing very well.
Okay? Okay, so this is where you have to do some work. 2 minutes now. What is politics? It seems like a really obvious question, but I want you to turn to your neighbour and just for 1 minute, the first person talks, what is politics, give an idea of what you think politics is, and then switch over, the other person says what politics is. And be careful, because I might ask for victims, okay? So after this minute one way, minute the other way, maybe me, maybe Louis will ask for someone to just give their view of that, summarising that conversation. Okay, so you've got 1 minute on the first person. Louis, as our house-brave person, is going to choose someone. Louis, who do you want to hear from?
Okay, so I was explaining to Louis that historical speaking, politics is coming from polis, which means city, in Greek.
Yeah.
So it should be, the politicians in ancient Greek were the people who were in charge of the well-being of the citizens.
Okay.
So then we translate, national, regional, local politics.
Okay.
I want to agree.
Thank you very much. And your name is?
Teresa.
Teresa. So thank you, Teresa, for that. And I'm afraid you've blown one of my slides as well. Louis, who else?
I don't know, Matt has very good politics.
Matt has
politics is like people who have like somehow worked through democracy or like dictatorship kind of risen above the public and have the power to make a lot of decisions that the public can but also cannot get a say in.
So there's nice words in there, there's power, there's politicians, public, so thank you for that. So the reason I got the 1 minute one, 1 minute another is I know you've had to think about it, unless of course you're talking about what you did earlier in the day or what you're going to do tonight, and I have no control over that, which is fine. But thank you, the two people speaking. So what is politics? As Teresa said, derives classical Greek politikos, affairs of the city. Okay? And what Teresa did, I love that. Go to the root of the word. Okay? This is a multinational audience. We speak many languages. It's really great to go back to the root. And we all must love Greeks, basically. The Greeks are, it is the mother tongue of politics, even today. You speak to a Greek about politics, you will get a lecture on language, and it's wonderful. I have Greek friends, and they help me a lot. So, polis, affairs of the city. So that's a bit abstract. This is a guy who has now died. He's got a lovely smiley face. He's called Bernard Crick. Bernard Crick was a really wonderful man. I never met him, but the people who speak of him, who did know him, thought he was really great. And this was a much more pragmatic definition of what politics is. So deciding who gets what, when, and how. So it's like sharing stuff out. And obviously you can apply that on every level. You know, not just money, but also air. You know, you could talk about the politics of pollution. You can talk about the politics of money, obviously specific. You can talk about the politics of food. You can get politics even of the hour and a half that I have with you. You know, this is a dictatorship. I'm standing up here and I get, to a large extent, until you start throwing things at me, the right to sort of take the time, as it were. But not all the time. Exercise of power, and then concerns the welfare and the survival of the whole community. Just imagine if we had political systems that had that third thing, the welfare and the survival of the whole community. Politics would be pretty cool, I reckon. Rather than politics, yeah, I don't know politics. Politics is boring. I don't know politics. Let's talk about something else. So that's Bernard Crick. Great guy, great eyebrows. And I'm sort of working on those myself. So that's the definition of politics, which brings me on to my favourite part of that, which is what is democracy. So we're going to do the same again with this, okay? We'll do a minute one way and a minute the other way, okay? And Louis this time will be walking around the room, seeing if he can find someone that he wants to pick on, okay? So you've got 2 minutes, one way, one the other way, okay? Let's go. we doing this time?
Leon had a great cow analogy.
I like cow analogies. Some of my best friends are cows. Let's have them.
Okay, so you have 2 cows,
Yep.
and the government takes one from you, buys your milk, and then uses the cow that they bought to supply other people.
Say the last part again.
Democracy, okay?
I'm not entirely sure that's correct.
It's not, it's fun though. It's not entirely true, but it brings cows in. And I have actually got them in, and I have now, so I'm pleased about that. Louis, who else?
I've had a few other blanks, people sort of going off actually, so if
Okay.
anyone wants to say something.
Anyone who is dying to say what they think democracy is? Yeah? It's quite an important topic. Don't know if you've noticed. Yeah.
I would say that democracy is when you're allowed to vote for the leader of your country or group. I don't think it needs to have, it doesn't, no democracy needs to have anything else to be called a democracy.
Okay. That's a good answer, and we'll come on to a slide which relates directly to that. So thank you, Ryan. Yeah.
I think our democracy is supposed to be the ability to criticize and have free speech about the leaders of your country or society and be able to have your own say in how things should be done and led.
Okay.
And it's supposed to give power to the people.
Yep.
It's supposed to have the civilians mostly in charge.
Okay. Power to the people, civilians in charge, the capacity and freedom to speak. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
I mean, if we're going to that route, I kind of recall that it comes from demo or demos or something that is the people, right?
Demos, the people, yep.
In Greek. And it's basically like, it's chosen by a group of people, even though at the beginning, like, only men from a certain social status could vote or something, but it's still kind of chosen collectively.
Yep.
Who lives, whatever was that.
Yep. So, thank you. And you could have guessed that there will be a slide taking us to the roots. But you raised another important point, which, why not tackle it now? The definition that we're looking at is from 2,500 years ago, and democracy at that time was designed for men. So let us not be pussyfooting around that point. The context of democracy when it was designed was for free citizens of Athens and other Greek cities. So it's important that the definitions we're going to look at relate to that time and all the social conventions of that time. And it was a totally patriarchal society, male-dominated. And I bring you forward to 200 years from now, in the past, French Revolution, American Revolution. It was also a male-dominated society. It was also a rich-dominated society. For the votes, when they came, were for people with land. So definitely there were social conventions, the original definition, that were hugely problematic for us in 2018, and also 200 years ago with the different version of democracy, as we're going to talk about in a minute, there were similar social conventions that were hugely problematic. So fortunately we're in 2018, post-Harvey Weinstein, and these things are being discussed more seriously than ever, and that's a great thing. Back to democracy. Anyone else have anything burning for their definition of democracy they'd like to tell us? Cows have had a say. Fish? Anyone? No? Okay, so there are more slides, you could have guessed. Who's this dude? Winston Churchill. So when I was starting as a sort of now a professional journalist, starting to have doubts about my job, at the age of probably 30, early 30s, I was saying to myself, I was seeing politicians and I was seeing political processes, specifically one to do with climate change actually, and the European carbon tax. And the environment ministers, the European environment ministers were going to put a carbon tax in force, and they made this proposal to the treasury ministers, the finance ministers and the heads of government, and they sort of said, nah, we're not going to do that. And I, as a journalist, had followed all the arguments for a carbon tax. It seemed like a really great idea. And so I was with the environment ministers. It goes to the finance ministers and the heads of state and government, and they say, not happening. And I was sort of thinking, so what is democracy? And when I asked that question, people say Winston Churchill. And why do they say Winston Churchill? Because he was a bit of a smart aleck, Winston Churchill, and he had this definition. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Very funny. So it's like, democracy's rubbish, but everything else is worse. It's a sort of classic British, live with it, basically. So people laugh and they say, oh yes, well done, Winston, very good. But it doesn't really help us, in terms of understanding what democracy was. So I had to sort of push that away. And that is where we stand in 2018 terms. Okay? It's not good enough. But often, I today have made you think about politics already, at least I hope I did, and I've also made you think about democracy as well. Most of the time, you're right. Do you want some of that? No? Most of the time, we don't get past Winston. Yeah? It's like, yeah, okay, funny quote, and we don't get anywhere. And we have to. So my objective today is quite simple. I want to stir up your thinking about democracy. And I'm hoping it's already started. I'm like the flu virus that Michael has had, and maybe others of you have had. I want to infect your brains with thinking about democracy. I hope you don't have to go to bed for a week afterwards and have a fever, but I do want you to think about it. So that is my idea. Get past Winston, okay? Winston is not good enough. So we come on to it's Rowan, isn't it? Yeah? So what Rowan was talking about just then. Actually, no, I've jumped a slide. So after my sort of Winston experience, I think I'd better just put in a little timeout and say, well, okay, this guy's standing up in front of us. Why should we listen to him? So the first response to that is, you don't have to, and there's no should involved. I am not a political scientist, not a historian, I'm not a philosopher, and I don't even speak Greek, okay? I can look it up like you. So I'm a journalist, and even then I did engineering. So I am not the person you would necessarily go to for a definition on democracy. And then I am, because I'm a citizen, so like you. So I should know what democracy is, and I should have a good understanding about it. And so should you have a good understanding. In the same way that I know that I should brush my teeth. It's that important. I know how to feed myself. I know when I come to a road that I should look so that I don't get killed, if I want to cross it. Democracy is incredibly important when you go to questions of how do we share things out, which is the definition of politics. So it's really important. And when you are a journalist, and there are more and more journalists given the wonders of social media and modern technology, it became very important to me to work out what democracy did mean. So the environment ministers had their great carbon tax. This is in the 1990s, before you were born, most of you. And a carbon tax in the 1990s would have made a big difference to the rate of pollution and the climate change that we're starting to witness. Okay? So I needed to know, because I could tell that my journalism job wasn't being done properly. So that was why, in the way, that's what started Fraudcast News and why I wrote that book. So this, for Rowan, is the sort of classical definition of democracy. So it's free and fair competitive elections. Okay? Elections, you put a tick against a candidate and you put it in the box. And you do it every 4 or 5 years. And it's also the freedom, as Cosmo was saying, to speak. But it's also to assemble. So the fact that we're here today, there are some societies where this would be illegal. You try to do this sort of thing in Turkey today, not a good idea. You try to do it probably in Russia today, not a good idea. And there are plenty of other countries around the world where this is dangerous. So we are lucky today to be able to do this. And that's because we have freedom to assemble, freedom to speak. When you have, oh, there's a spelling mistake, sorry about that. Freedom to associate, it's not freedom to associate. Freedom to associate is to join things like NGOs or unions. And so if you want a functioning democracy, then you need these things. So it's fair elections, competitive elections means that anyone can contest them, and all those freedoms. So, this is a more subtle point, because it seems, and it's also a more subtle point in the year which is 100 years of suffragettes, which is in the UK. So 100 years ago, women in the UK won the right to vote, because some very brave people were taking risks, even to their bodily health, in order to win that right. So I put this up with a certain amount of reticence 100 years on from the suffragettes. But I do it in full respect for them, because elections are not good enough. And they are not equal to democracy. And I'm going to show you, over the course of the time that remains to me today, 3 films which are related to that. Because this is not an obvious point. And after we've been through the Winston barrier, which is thank you Winston, goodbye, and then we've got a conventional definition of what democracy is, we've got this, what, democracy is not equal to elections? This is strange. And it's not what you hear every day. But it's something that, as part of my flu virus agenda, I want to put into your brains. And the films will illustrate this more clearly. So this is Theresa. Democracy, back to the roots. The original version, ruled by the people. For rule, you could have government by the people as well. So I'm not going to bother pronouncing those words, or certainly not that one, because I don't speak Greek. But the demos and the kratos are the important bit. Demos is the people, kratos is the rule or power. So it's power in the hands of the people. You think, okay, so back to these wonderful Greeks. 2,500 years ago, they were thinking, how do we govern our society? How do we do politics? How do we share things out? And they had this word democracy, which we have used in 2018. When it was originally defined, that's what it meant. And it really did mean government by the people being the eligible citizens. 200 years ago, the French and American revolutions, the people who were revolting, in the American instance, were plantation owners. They were lawyers. They were rich people in what was then a British colony. The American Revolution wasn't, despite the Declaration of Independence, it wasn't this wonderful egalitarian movement. It was basically kicking out the British, which is fine. You'd want to do that. But it was kicking out the British to get a new load of people in charge, not to liberate, certainly not the indigenous people, or the slaves, or the poor people. It was replacing one elite with a new elite. And they didn't like, the James Madisons of this world didn't like democracy. They talked about the states as a republic. And they put in place a mechanism of Congress and the Senate, which there was even words in the founding documents, the Federalist Papers, in terms of the Senate protecting the opulent. So put in place mechanisms to effectively keep the status quo. Yeah? And that's hugely problematic. But at that stage, it wasn't called a democracy. It was Andrew Jackson, who was the 4th American president, hit upon democracy as a great campaigning word. Power to the people. Vote Andrew Jackson, and you will get democracy. And that was the time where the label was stuck onto the United States Constitution and founding mechanisms or system execution. So what the Founding Fathers had worried about as being giving power to all the people and designing systems to prevent that and not calling it democracy, suddenly became, with Andrew Jackson, democracy. So that's when it changed. 2,500 years ago, it meant government by the people. 200 or so years ago, it became elections. Okay? So the flu virus is doing its work. Okay? Keep that. It's a big subject. I can't do everything today. But hold that. Okay? Doesn't equal elections. When did this happen? Okay? And now we're going to get on to how we doing. Ready? You still with me? Good. We're going on to someone you may be familiar with. I think that's enough. Okay? So we're on to the first film. And this is a very short film. It's 3.5 minutes, and in a way it's like an animated summary of what I've said so far with relation to democracy. Okay? So we put that up and see how we go. Do you want to do some of the lights? Yeah. If I just hit this mic, will that fire it up?
Yeah, if you do that.
Most of us believe that if you hold elections, you automatically get democracy. But is this true? History shows that elections do not always create democracies. They can even bring dictators to power. For 3,000 years, humans have been experimenting with democracy. But elections only entered the game some 200 years ago, with the American and French revolutions. So what was there before? The answer is surprising. Lottery, or sortition, to use the technical term. Here is what Aristotle had to say. The appointment of magistrates by lot is democratical, and the election of them oligarchical, or aristocratic. Of the 7,000 public functions in ancient Athens, only 100 were elected. All the rest were assigned by lot. Even if only 3 adult men could be drafted, the range of tasks given to them was impressive. The system was based on 3 principles. If you draft people by lot, you get everyday people in government. If you give them time and information, they find solutions that work. And if you do it often, more and more people get involved. This system worked. It increased public trust, it diminished corruption, and it fostered long-term thinking. Sortition was continued in many Renaissance states, ensuring centuries of peace and prosperity. Rousseau and Montesquieu, the great philosophers of the 18th century, agreed with Aristotle. Drafting people by lot was democratic, electing them was aristocratic. Yet why then were elections favoured right after the revolution? The answer is shocking, because those who took power in America and France were against democracy. They feared the rule of the mob. Elections were not introduced to make democracy possible, but to stop democracy. Only very few people could vote, even less could run for office. Elections had to create a new elite, a natural aristocracy as Thomas Jefferson called it. Power had to remain in the hands of a minority. In the 19th and 20th century, more and more people obtained the right to vote and run for office. This was a necessary improvement, but in the 21st century, it's no longer sufficient. Today, many people feel that ticking a box every 4 or 5 years is simply not enough. They still don't feel heard. That's why distrust is rising at an alarming rate. What if people were not only given the right to vote, but also a right to speak? What if we had sortition next to elections? Going back to lottery sounds crazy, but we're using it already every day. We call it opinion polls. The only problem is, polls ask us what we think when we don't think. What if we had a chance to think and discuss with others first? And what if politicians listened then? We urgently need to democratize democracy. We ought to be against elections if democracy is reduced to them. For it's not just about your vote, it's about your voice too.
Okay, I'm very good at languages. That's against elections in Japanese. So, that's a bit freaky, isn't it? Anyone have any thoughts on what you just saw? Any questions? Any reflections?
How do
Yeah.
it actually work? Like, they just pick random people and...
Okay, so that's an extremely good question. How does it actually work? And I think probably the non-politician answer would be it works in many different ways. And by that, I mean that you can use lotteries for many different instances. So we think of elections as we vote, say, every 4 years, and a government comes in. And then we go away and do our everyday lives, and we come back 4 years later and vote again. Yeah? That's sort of our political engagement. You know, maybe we do other bits and pieces, but most people, that's it. And in fact, even for quite a few people, they think that the system is so rotten that they don't even bother voting. And I can understand that, actually. Why vote if this party is the same as this party? Pretty much. You know, I don't like either of these people. What do I do? Sort of thing. So how does lottery work? I'm going to show you a specific, in fact, the next two films are two specific examples of how lotteries can work. When people put the question, how do lotteries work, they're normally meaning, how could we replace the current system with lotteries? And that's like a big, big move. And if it were ever to happen, i.e. the end result would be that we replaced elections by lotteries, it would take a few years. Not lifetimes, but it would take a while. You would need to persuade people that it's not bonkers, for a start. You would need to show smaller scale examples. For example, the film I will show you, the third film, is what the Irish have just done. They randomly selected 100 people to represent Irish society, so in fact adult Irish society, they didn't do people under the voting age. And they brought them together for 5 weekends over 5 months. And they talked about, in fact it was 15 months, but the 5 weekends that I have covered in the film were to do with abortion law in Ireland. So Ireland has one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the world, not just Western Europe, but in the world. It's a criminal offence for a doctor to perform an abortion, except in extreme circumstances of risk to the life of the mother. And so the random selection in this instance was to represent a cross-section of Irish society, have them deliberate. And what that means, deliberation is not just the chats that you guys had for your 1 minute on policy or politics and democracy. Deliberation means that you get people together, you present this side of the argument, this side of the argument, you give them a chance to chat. So let's say me, 51 years old, male, white, I'm meeting a representative sample of, say, the UK, or keep the Irish example. So that means it's a single mother, it's an old man, it's someone of colour, it's all sorts of other different aspects. And we get the same presentations, we deliberate. So Patrick, I think this, what do you think? And that person gives back what they think. And you have a deliberation and engagement. And what's extraordinary is that people change their positions. So the lottery process brings together a random selection which represents the society on a single issue. You deliberate, and then you come to conclusions which you make as a recommendation potentially to Parliament, or you could have it go to voters directly, so that if the whole country was then going to consider this subject, they could read the Citizens' Assembly or the gathered together body on what they'd done, the materials they looked at, how they discussed them, and then the recommendations they made. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Brexit vote in the UK, so remain or leave the European Union. If that vote had taken place after a Citizens' Assembly, then rather having what the different parties were proposing, which were very inaccurate on both sides, a lot of what was said, you can actually take the Assembly's conclusions and you just read through them, see what material they got, and you get something closer to truth than someone who believes one side or the other side. So that's one instance in which it could work. There's a proposal in Scotland to have a second chamber. So in Scotland there's a government which is just one chamber, so not like in London where there's the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The second chamber would be randomly selected. So the politicians elected would make some proposals for law, and the second one, randomly selected, would say, I like that, or maybe you should change that, and they would be in office for 2 years. pain. So that's another example. This book, Against Elections, has examples. This is a very good book. Whoever buys coffees from Costa or Starbucks or, yeah? So how much would you be prepared to pay for a Costa coffee, Starbucks coffee?
£3.
£3? Okay.
No, like, it's like £2.
And maybe a donut or a croissant or something. So you could take a £5 hit, yeah, for example. So a couple of visits to the coffee shop gets you this book, yeah? That's I talk in the currency that I have with my Toulouse students is kebabs, actually, because they're students of the university age, and that's, they understand kebabs more easily than euros, it seems. So for them, it's 2 kebabs. So in answer to the question, I gave you a bit of an answer. It's not enough, because it's a very complicated question. There are more in there, yeah? Yeah.
It just, I was wondering if, of course it's important how the lottery happens for the, getting the people, but maybe more important is how do you determine what information they're given? Who gets to determine that?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
And with the Irish example, there was a secretariat, so like civil servants who were involved in that process, but also there were groups of participants who were responsible for the information that came to the assembly. And also, for observers, you could see all the documents that they were presented with. They had people for the case for changing the legislation, the case against. They had witness statements from women who had travelled from Ireland to usually England for abortions. And so everyone had an opportunity to present their case to the assembly. And there's a record in detail of all the submissions to the assembly. So the best sort of check is transparency. If you can see who can present, rather than current politics, which is often we never know why a policy's changed. You don't know who's meeting and all that stuff. So it's a complicated 3 minutes of film, okay? It's a real headband. The flu virus is really getting deeply into you now, okay? And you will not get everything today. I certainly did. It takes layers upon layers upon layers and revisiting the material. But that's the way flu works. It just sneaks up on you slowly. And before you know, you cannot escape democracy. Okay? So this is a great book. 2 kebabs, a couple of visits to the coffee shop, and you're laughing. Okay? So I'm not here to make Gopal's life any easier. I know that Brockwood, compared to most schools, is pretty democratic. You have a lot of say in the way things work here, but maybe not democratic enough. So this is going to be another film, and it's a guy, Adam Cronkite and Simon Peck, and they work in Bolivia. Simon is Canadian and Adam is American, and they are working in Bolivia with Bolivians to see how you could have a truly democratic school. And so they use random selection for student elections, rather than elections. So anyone in the school can pick a bean out of a bag and will be chosen to be on the student government. And the way the government then works, they give them help to be the government. Yeah? And what's good about that is that people have the flu virus injected from the start, which is democracy. They have to think about it, and they also have to do it. Yeah? So this is an interview I did with these guys in 2016. It's not very long, but it actually explains how you could do democracy in a school. And I think Gopal has my email address, but I'm not sure he knows where I live. So here it goes.
So hello and welcome back. We've got a second edition of Democracy Talk from the World Forum for Democracy in Strasbourg, France. I'm Patrick Chalmers, and I'm delighted to be talking to Adam Cronkite and Simon Peck from Democracy in Practice. So Democracy in Practice. Adam, what do you guys do?
So Democracy in Practice is a small nonprofit, and we focus on democratic experimentation, innovation, and capacity building. And so we were invited to come here to the World Forum to present an initiative that we've had going on in Bolivia now 3 years, which is teaming up with students to reinvent student government, make it more inclusive, make it more representative, more participative than traditional forms of student government that you find in schools around the world.
And so, I mean, I have a 14-year-old daughter, for example. She has just been voted onto the student government for her year. She's been voted on. Tell me exactly what is it that you guys do that is different from the way she was chosen on student government?
Well, one of the things that you see when you have elections in schools is that they tend to advantage more ambitious, more popular, more charismatic students, and disadvantage students that are shyer and less popular. And so one thing that we propose to these schools is that they do away with elections and that they randomly select their representatives in lotteries. And so that gives everyone an equal chance to participate directly in the student government and develop civic and leadership skills. Right? So that's one big difference. We also encourage rotation, so shorter terms, and you get more students involved throughout the year. And there's no more president or vice president. They work together in horizontal teams. And so experiment with a lot of different ways to get more students involved, to give students equal opportunities to be involved, and then to give a real rich experience once they're involved.
That's a wonderful answer. I can now tell her to watch this tape and she'll get an explanation that I was trying to give her over the breakfast table, and she'll have it straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. But tell me, you've been at it for 3 years, so what sort of impacts have you found so far?
Yes, we've been reflecting on this quite a bit, and we'd say there's been a lot of tangible impacts, and also impacts in the ways people think about democracy. And so on the ground, we've seen a lot of changes in, for example, the participation. So a lot more students are interested in participating, and because, as Adam mentioned, we're now rotating roles, many more people are able to participate in the government. There's also been a lot of tangible impacts that we spoke about, for example, creating the first ever school library, first ever set of student cards, a lot of skill development. People are now much better at working in teams, solving problems, communicating. And also, I think, in terms of the way people think about democracy, we've done a structured research study on that. And it's been really impressive to see people thinking much more critically about democracy now. So people express that, for example, random selection can have a wide-ranging set of benefits over elections that previously they weren't aware of. And a lot of students are now advocating for using these practices not only in their school on a continued basis, but also recommending them to be used at other schools as well. So it's that critical thinking about democracy and having people see outside the election box, so to speak, and see that there's other ways of doing things that's been really impressive.
Interesting. So we're getting more people involved, we're getting a far broader choice of students involved, you're getting interest and real engagement from the students. These are quite radical ideas. You know, we're surrounded here in Strasbourg by sort of democracy theorists, and a lot of democracy theorists will talk about elections and, you know, how that's the pinnacle of democracy. But you guys are quite radical, and it is radical, even if it's only in a school context. So, I mean, where are we going with this? Where might this sort of thinking take us, do you think?
Well, for us, it's about experimentation, right? So you have a model of student government that isn't working. It isn't working from an educational standpoint, it isn't working from a leadership standpoint. And so through creative experimentation, we're developing better approaches together with the students. And when we look around, we see a lot of democratic institutions outside of schools. So you have unions, civil society organizations, our elected governments, that people are increasingly dissatisfied with. And it doesn't seem to be working as well as we would like it to. And we think that it's through creative experimentation that we're going to find better approaches, and that's what needs to be happening. For our part, with Democracy in Practice, we're already in some serious talks with a union in Bolivia about helping them reinvent their internal union governance, and we're hoping we start to see more of this type of experimentation, be it with these practices or other practices, you know, but just break open the playbook and let's start trying out new things, and we're bound to call it something that works better than the systems we have. We're so frustrated with it.
Okay, and I'm going to throw in one last question here. It's sort of related to what you just said, but our previous speaker, Carsten, there, she was talking about how conventional politics and sort of village meetings or town meetings, for example, give a platform for the incensed and the articulate. So people who are angry and people who can speak well. And my sense of what you're talking about is that you're getting around that problem. But have you got findings specifically from the classrooms, or are the quieter, less angry people getting a chance to speak? Is that what you're finding?
So I can speak from the research perspective, and so one major thing that people have brought up as an advantage of random selection is the fact that everybody has an equal opportunity to be selected. And a lot of people have said that it's, like you said, it's not only the popular people anymore, the ones with the best set of social skills, that are being able to participate in the student government. So that's been a huge shift, and that's been recognized as a major advantage by the students. I think Adam can share more about what he's seen on the ground.
Well, on the ground, towards the end of their term, we tend to ask student governments who are finishing their term, student government members, right? We tend to ask them, had we had normal elections and you had to become a candidate, form a party, run a campaign, would you have been a candidate? And anecdotally, about 3/4 of the students who are finishing their term of office say no, they wouldn't have anything to do with that. Either for fear of being in front of the whole school saying vote for me, or that they were new in the school and they wouldn't have even had enough friends to form a party with. And so certainly over half, if not a majority of the students that finished their term of office wouldn't have been there had it been with elections. And you see a whole range of social skills, social skill development that comes into this environment in the student government. So, and then the other element of it, you have students that aren't just the most angry or the most articulate that make it into the student government, but that doesn't solve the problem necessarily of equalizing participation. Then you need dynamics in the student government meetings that make it, because you have very articulate, very charismatic students that enter the lotteries too and get picked as well, right? And that would have been candidates. And so sometimes you'll have a situation where that person makes it in the student government and they're all ready and set to dominate meetings, to dominate talk time, to try and really push the group in certain directions. And so finding ways to make sure that doesn't happen in the meetings is another important part of it, not just the random selection.
Well, this is outrageous. On the behalf of 500 million Europeans, I say thank you for coming over, because we are sitting in Europe, we have racism, we have democratic systems which are in crisis, that's no exaggeration, and we need some good news, and what you guys are doing sounds fascinating, frankly. So thank you for coming. Thank you for talking to Democracy Talk today, and this is Patrick Chalmers signing off for Democracy Talk.
Okay, so that's democracy in practice. These people, you can look them up. They're really nice, and they are developing materials for how to do this yourself. I love those people, and I love what they're doing. I think it's quite subversive, because they are basically producing working models for how to do this, and they're doing it in schools. And if ever there was anyone sort of trying to stop this happening, they would never think of looking in schools. And so before they know it, they'll have all these incredibly well-educated Democrats going out to be big people, and it'll be too late by the time they realize what's going on. So I'm very happy about what they do. Any questions specifically about that?
What happens if you get, say, just on the student council or student thing? What if you get people elected who have no interest in it?
So I think it's a very good question, and it speaks to this idea of, you have it in criminal juries as well. You can not do jury service if you really don't want to, or you have some circumstances which make it impossible for you to do it. And the people who love random selection, there is a sort of difference between different parties as to whether it should be obligatory, i.e. if you're chosen, you do it, versus you can have circumstances which excuse you. I think specifically with democracy in practice, the people who stand up, they use coffee beans, I think. The people who stand up to put their hand in the bag to choose either a purple or a green coffee bean have chosen, say, okay, I'm prepared to put my name into the hat, as it were, and potentially be chosen. So I don't think it comes up in this instance, but it's a very good and relevant question.
And if it was to be translated to like country level, would it be one random person for each, say, minister post or something?
That's where I would put you back to this, right? There's a great chapter in that book which talks about how you could do it at a national level, and it's not just one random selection body. It's a sort of complicated system, which seems pretty credible to me. I read it, and I know the person whose idea it's based on as well. And you know, we're going to have to see it experimented on. My secret plan for the revolution is that Scotland will do this. Scotland's a really interesting place, obviously I come from it. That's not really. Scotland's an interesting place because they had a referendum on independence, and that got everyone really worked up. So on a British scale of political interest and awareness, the Scots are awake, shall we say, versus the English, Welsh, Northern Irish, who are in various states of sleep. Sorry, guys. And so Scotland's interesting because they're awake. They were worked up by the independence referendum. They were also worked up by the Brexit referendum because Scotland voted to stay and the rest of the UK voted to leave. So they're a bit feisty about that as well. But it's also a good size. So 6 or 7 million. They've got their own parliament. It's quite a good scale on which to experiment. So my secret plan, don't tell anyone, is that the Scots will take on these ideas, and they are looking at them. I do know for a fact. Which brings us, so thank you for that question. Gopal, yeah.
It's related to what Rowan asked as well, about some particular person not wanting to participate. If you have a group of people, at least in one kind of area, they don't want to participate, or in Scotland, for instance, what will get a people who are asleep to be awake, democratically speaking, politically speaking?
Bribery. And I'm not being entirely flippant. You know, we have precious and short lives, and that's why Louis has got his role as the time monitor. And you know, some people don't want to have anything to do with this, and that's perfectly legitimate. So you know, maybe we should pay them, and because they're giving up time, they could be going fishing or surfing or whatever it is they want to do. You know, maybe we need to tempt them in with some sort of reward. And you know, some people won't come. You won't get everyone, and you also need to actively go out and seek underrepresented communities. Because, you know, people are intimidated. Our education system is very unequal. And some people will think, that's not for me. You know, I wouldn't be seen dead in that sort of environment. And you need to work to bring them. So, you know, with marginalized communities, often it's the case for them, or self-excluding communities, you need to go and find them. You know, if statistically they should be there, you, as the organizer, have to take it as a responsibility to go and find them and find out why they don't want to come. So bribery is one approach, but also some, you know, serious work to go and seek them as well. It's not easy, you know. This is not like the perfect box-in solution, but given the current system, it has legs, as it were.
Specifically with Scotland, what do you think has led to that kind of awareness?
Okay, so I'm going to do a Scottish accent now. It's 200 years of injustice. Not exactly. It's a whole series of things. The independence referendum really caught a light in the country. It was really, really interesting. If you had a chance to be in Scotland during that time, I actually did some reporting. And people were really excited about the possibility of having agency, as it's called. You know, an opportunity to be asked to take a decision on something, versus just rubbish old elections. And that got people really excited. So I think that was part of it. There's quite a lot of other factors as well. So we're going to move on. Yeah.
Just one thing about the...
Sorry, you need to declare an interest. You have a question to me?
I don't know what the numbers are, but on jury duty, most people when they get called to be to do jury duty actually are quite interested. So I think very few people turn it down. Their time's compensated, but a lot of people will never go forward because they don't feel that they're worthy or that they know enough or that they're educated enough. But when they get invited, they get identified as somebody who could come and participate in the jury, they're usually pretty interested, and then they often feel much more empowered afterwards. Like people want to have a civic duty and to play it, and then feel that, wow, that was useful, I learned something, and I feel I'm part of society. So I think we have a tendency to want to be involved, but to exclude ourselves because, we don't feel confident enough, or we don't think we know enough. So, maybe we'll find that more people do want to do that than we think.
How do you do people who want to do it and are chosen by lottery, but are rubbish?
Okay, so I'm a dictator. So I'm going to thank you for your question, and I'm going to decline to answer it right now. Because we've got Louis on my case. In fact, he might have left. Goes there. I've got 21 minutes left, okay? And in that 21 minutes, I have a film that lasts 16 minutes, 40 seconds, yeah? So I can answer that, possibly at the end, possibly not. So I've talked about this film already a little bit. And it also relates to the other objective for my talk. So one objective for the talk was to be the virus, the democracy virus, okay? So I hope that's working. The second objective is that, there's always one, isn't there? The second one is that, and I've written it down, and this is an old person speaking obviously, I want to persuade you that there is real hope in our politics and our journalism, okay? And that is not a sentence you hear every day, even every week, okay? So there is real hope, both in our politics and in our journalism. So the first film was short, and it was raising this idea of random selection, okay? It was that book, Against Elections. And it talks about specific examples taking place around the world, using this technique. The second one is Bolivia. It's a school, they're actually doing this work, and they're producing the materials to spread it elsewhere. This third one, and I'm sure this is why Michael accepted that I could come and do this talk, is about Ireland. Now, for me, Ireland, I think, is the most exciting political laboratory in the world as we stand. And I am not joking. Really, I'm not. And if you say that to an Irish person, they say, oh, don't be silly. They reject it, they do not realize it. It takes an outsider and someone who's obsessed or is infected with the democracy virus to spot it. So why is Ireland so interesting? So I, having gone through my painful process of conventional journalism and discovering that I was not doing the job that I had dreamt of when I started, and the major problem were structural problems in journalism, but also in politics. I then, I was sort of a bit unhappy for a few years, I suppose, and a bit disappointed, and a bit thinking, what am I going to do? And I came back to journalism. I do want to be a journalist. I love journalism. Journalism is excellent. Yeah? As I told the people who were interested in journalism this morning, it is a great job. But if it's going to be a great job, journalists who are doing it need to have stories which are also looking towards solutions. And that's this story. So this is The Irish, okay? This is the first film in a series of 9 films that I intend to make over the next sort of 18 months or so, maybe 2 years, depending on how I can get funding. And this I filmed with a proper documentary crew in Dublin in July last year, okay? And it's about the Citizens' Assembly, So randomly selected 100 Irish people. They did a couple of different topics, but this is specifically about abortion. Okay? So I'll run the film. We'll have a couple of minutes for questions. And then Michael will have my email. If there's other stuff you want to ask about it, we can do that. So let's go to this.
See, life's not black and white, and many people with strongly held views on abortion are in the black area or the white area. I believe that the vast amount of people are in the grey area in between.
Walk with me now.
We have in Ireland a serious history of neglecting women's health, women's rights. We still have in our constitution that the women's place is in the home. You know, there's this sort of notion that it's like irresponsible floozies going out and just having sex with random people and they end up pregnant, and they don't deserve. Who are any of us to judge? How do we know any circumstance in which people are? And, you know, people have a very narrow view. But the narrative has been opened up in Ireland.
The political dynamite issues here are mainly probably have to do with religious issues. So the referendum that we did have on was same-sex marriage. That was a pretty big issue here. When one of the things that the Citizens Assembly is doing now is repeal the 8th, which is abortion. That's also a very politically sensitive issue here in Ireland. A lot of the points were kind of many people would regard them as archaic. Many people would regard them as very important and would make their electoral decisions solely based on that point. So they're very, very divisive issues here, although they might seem strange for an international audience.
Take my hand, Lord. Take my hand, Lord. All alone.
If you're trying to win a seat in a certain county or electoral area, and this is a very important topic to 5% or 10% of people living in that area, and they say, I will not vote for you if you do anything with this at all, if you approve a referendum, you're going to lose your seat. So what we have in a way is a lot of people who don't want to discuss it or want to keep this issue off the agenda because they're afraid of losing their seat. And what that means is effectively a small minority of people can keep an item off the agenda.
I think this issue in Ireland could never have gotten to the point we're at today were it not for the Citizens Assembly. I think we would have been years getting there, if we ever got there.
Ireland has one of the most restrictive regimes against abortion in Europe. You know, one of the most restrictive. And that clearly that's not a position that can last. You know, we're already being condemned by international agencies for the particular position that we find ourselves in as a republic. And this goes right back to the original referendum in 1983 to insert an anti-abortion clause into our constitution in the first instance. So now having had it inserted into our constitution, we've been trapped ever since with that. And there have been various efforts throughout the decades since 1983 to try and clarify, resolve, or improve the situation as it currently stands, and none of them have worked. And in many ways, this is the best chance we now have as a result of the deliberations of the Citizens Assembly to finally get some political momentum on changing our constitution.
self-employed events manager.
My name is John Long. I'm 56 years old. I come from the second city in Ireland, which is Cork.
My name is David Chow. I'm a 47-year-old truck driver. I live in Kildare town.
I'm Maureen O'Flynn. I'm a 22-year-old student from Cork in the south of Ireland. So I was quite afraid coming the first day. I was nervous. There's 98 other people that I've never met before. And we all I walked in and I met people kind of similar age, and we just got all talking, and we were all kind of apprehensive about it, but we kind of fell into it quite quickly.
It took place over a period of 5 months, 5 weekends probably of 15 or 20 hours of sessions, papers, debate, and then dozens and dozens of hours of research and reading and analysis. So I would say probably put a couple of 100 hours of total time into it, which is probably more than any parliamentary party committee would have put into it. So we're probably the best informed amateurs in the country on this topic at the moment.
It's been a very difficult process, I'll be honest. It hasn't been a walk in the park. Some of the sessions were very difficult. The energy has been very tough. It's been, it's not an easy topic, and some of the presentations were very difficult to listen to. But yeah, no, I think as a group, I think we've managed to, I suppose, support each other through that.
Unlike some of the debates that have taken place in referendum in the past in Ireland, the Citizens' Assembly was very respectful and very congenial to everybody's opinion. So there was no major arguments or disputes here at the Citizens' Assembly, even though there was serious disagreements, as there would always be on this subject.
I came in pro-choice, okay? But I came in pro-choice like most citizens of the country, uninformed, or informed my own way. But we found that some of the sessions that we had, we were given legal, we were given medical, we were given ethical, moral, religious, and then social as well, and then the advocacy groups as well. We had all of them too. But I found that, first of all, that some of the sessions, like the legal and the medical, were head melting because there's so much information. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a doctor, so we didn't understand half of it. So that was like, how am I going to process this? But the mechanism that they had set up with the assembly, how it was done, the question and answer, round table discussions and everything, and the presenters of the speeches and that hung around and answered your question. And it wasn't a case that it was a stupid question. It didn't have to be a stupid question, or it could be a stupid question. It was answered. But you always felt at the end of it, you understood what it was that you were saying.
I thought I knew a lot about it, but I've learned that it wasn't just about abortion. There was a whole other side to the Eighth Amendment that I had never really thought of coming up to it, which is just general health care for women.
I wouldn't say that the process has changed my view terribly much, but it has significantly deepened my understanding of the topic, of, I suppose, the legal framework for it, the medical framework, and then the social framework of the implications of the Eighth Amendment. So yeah, my understanding would have increased exponentially.
For myself personally, I probably would have been in the middle, I wouldn't have been a pro-life, a typical pro-life position. I would have been in the middle, where I would have been strongly in favour of our liberalising its abortion laws, to taking topics like fetal abnormality, rape, incest, risk to the life and the health of the mother, and so on and so forth. But as the time went on, and as we were getting more and more information, and as it was totally fact-based, unbiased, totally, I saw myself moving, and I think a lot of the people actually did here, I was surprised, started moving to a pro-choice position, to the extent that we surprised the whole country when we voted at the end of that section, that we voted for radically liberalising the abortion laws in Ireland.
no certainty about what the outcome will be on the abortion question. The Citizens' Assembly has produced a very well-considered report. I think it surprised all observers, it's safe to say, in terms of the how far the Citizens' Assembly want to take the liberalising of our abortion legislation in this country.
My name is Jonathan Victory. I'm a filmmaker, and I've been doing some journalist and activist work around the Constitutional Convention, the Citizens' Assembly, and all the political reform issues happening in Ireland. I was in college when the financial crisis was unfolding in Ireland, and at the end of 2010 there was a decision that Ireland would enter a bailout programme with the EU and the IMF. And this was being signed off by a government that was the most unpopular government in the history of the state. And something felt so wrong about there being all this debt incurred from a corrupt banking sector, and these decisions being made at very high level, like no deference like to citizens in terms of a referendum or anything. There was an election called at the start of 2011, and around that time in Ireland, we saw the emergence of lots of groups that were campaigning for political reform or institutional reform. They were looking at basically like, how did we get into this mess?
It's hard to describe it today, just how bad it was, really how scary it was to live through. We're in the teeth of the worst economic crisis in our history. Various parts of the academic community seem to be getting involved in debates about the crisis, particularly the economists. So I was one of a small group of political scientists who decided that we try and emulate what the economists seem to be doing. So we had a blog that had already been established by others, but we sort of took it on much more proactively as a group called politicalreform.ie, and we started to promote the idea of citizen-oriented debates about political reform.
When you leave them to these, assemblies without much in the way of control over top of them, they don't actually make crazy, reckless decisions. And there have been assemblies in other areas of the world too. I mean, there's been assemblies in Canada, for example, on electoral reform. Actually, they get together and they talk, and they come to compromises, and they do consider things. So there's not really a major mystery of how to do this. You just randomly select some people, which we already do anyway when we do jury service. You put them in hotel rooms for a couple of weekends or however long it takes, and see what comes out of it.
It's not just, say, a particular type of people that have gone to college and they've studied something and they're all making views, and you get to hear what the ordinary people, the people that it affects on the ground, how they feel about something, what they would like to change about it, and then go about it in a political manner after gaining all of the information that they're going to be gaining from the Citizens' Assembly.
If you're cynical about your politician's ability to change legislation, pass legislation, or come up with legislation, but if there's an issue that's burning to your society in general, have an assembly.
So what I hope to see in coming months is that the Oireachtas, the Parliament committee that's been established to look at the deliberation, the outcome of the Citizens' Assembly on abortion, that they don't just put those recommendations to one side. I hope they engage in a considered debate about the detail of those recommendations. And I think that's the best way to use the Citizens' Assembly as a bolt-on, as an addition to our representative system of government, not a replacement.
There seems to be a political disconnect all over the Western world for the traditional political parties, and this is it's a new layer of democracy. Oh, you can't have too much democracy. So this is a new layer, and democracy should be an expression of the will of the people. Right? So we think here we're an expression of the will of the people.
Democracy is just representing people's views, representing what's going on the ground in people's lives, taking it into Parliament and fixing it. That's the idea. Isn't that it?
There's a huge grounds for optimism. We see citizens' assemblies happening all over the world. We see constitutional change happening, in places like Iceland, where they did a constitutional, a kind of crowdsourced constitution. We see a lot of software popping up to help people make decisions democratically, like liquid democracy, for example. So we have actually great possibilities.
Right now we're getting a sense around the world and in Ireland that politicians get into power and they're just a bit condescending or contrarian. They know better than you. They know how things work. Can't you just let them get on with it? No, this is our society. This is our democracy. All we want is to make decisions together. It's considered a radical idea, democracy, but you wouldn't think it's asking for much.
In a way, that's the first sort of grown-up film that I've made, because I'm a text journalist, that's where I came from, not a video journalist. And doing that film makes me appreciate the skills of a documentary filmmaker. So the guy who shot the camera work is Mike Carling, spectacularly good. Christina Ertz, who did the editing, did a fantastic job. I thought I knew how to muck around on sort of Final Cut Pro and make stuff, and she showed me that it's not quite as easy as that. And we put Moby up there as well. He gives his music for free. So I've got sort of 0 minutes. Is Louis still here? Yeah, that's good. He hasn't left. Am I doing okay, Louis? Yeah. Okay, I haven't been shot. Yes, Linus.
I have a question. If we have time to answer it.
If your colleagues are happy, I'm happy.
Okay. I'm sorry, this question is not straight on this topic what is it, but still because you was talking about climate change, I would like to ask you.
Yes.
What is the leading cause of climate change? Your all experience, you said 13 years, yeah?
Yeah, I mean 25 years on climate change. What's the leading cause? I mean too much pollution in the atmosphere, I think.
So what's the cause? Pollution.
What's the cause?
Yeah.
The specific physical cause is too much increases in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. You can obviously cause. It was originally ignorance about the effects of our pollution on the atmosphere, but actually the science was starting about 120 years ago. The notion of a greenhouse effect was known about 120 years ago. In the 60s, there was a presidential commission in the United States, concluded we really need to do something about this. There was Exxon, huge oil and gas company, in the 1970s was doing research into climate change, and it found out climate change, that's not good. We don't like it. And then it found also, I think the report got to the accountancy department, and they said, we don't like climate change either, and what's more, we don't want to talk about it. And so from there came the denial program. So what's the cause? It is, first of all, ignorance. We didn't know what we were doing. Then it was the science came out, we did know, and then it was power. Then it was failure of politics, failure of journalism, exactly the things that got me writing a book and leaving my job with a salary, with a pension, with all sorts of nice things which we associate with conventional work. It was the failures of the political systems, the failure of the media systems. That's why we're faced in 2018 with a clear and present danger, which is climate change.
I have paper here. saying that it's facts, and they're saying that the main cause of climate change is our agriculture. It's 21% of all CO2 is from agriculture, and all the 13% comes from cars, all what we're using, burning oil. So, but there's not this information, like politics or journalists, they're not talking about this. You can't find this in TV or in the main pages of government or in the...
Well, I would say you can. And if it's not in the main pages of the media that you're looking at, that is true, and there are criticisms that you could make in terms of media. There's you were in the session this morning. I had the book Manufacturing Consent. Okay, so there are reasons that climate change is not on the front page every day, as it should be. And this fellow with the nice eyebrows, remember him? Number 2, exercise of power. Okay, so the problems of the political system are one fundamentally of power. So who has power? We talked about elections, we talked about random selection, but we haven't talked much about power. And we, the 7.5 billion and our friends the fish and cows and all the rest, need the power to stop the pollution. And at the moment the power is very concentrated. So I don't know how much time we can give to specific climate change. It's 5:07.
I want to just come to
I know this,
this
and
topic.
I'm the class dictator at the moment, so I need to ask permission how we stand on timing.
I think we need to call it a day.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we can talk about this afterwards, Liz. The last slide is the most important one, I really appreciate your time and your attention. But my late mother said to me, always, 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 there's no substitute for good manners, and there's no excuse for bad ones. So, thank you very much for your time.